Today is a very special episode because it allows me to talk about 3 of the most famous dead gorillas in the world. However, the actual news story concerns a living gorilla by the name of Ndume.
He's the star of this story and he's still alive, but no one really knows how long he'll survive. He was living in a trailer as Coco's mate, but now she's kicked the bucket, who knows his fate? Cincinnati want to reclaim this mammal, but the G Foundation say he won't survive the travel.
Ndume is a 37-year-old male gorilla who was born in Cincinnati Zoo. Much of his family, including his 47-year-old father, still live there, but in 1991 he was moved to the Gorilla Foundation in California to act as a companion for their famous female gorilla Coco. In June of this year, Coco died, and since then Cincinnati have been campaigning to have Ndume returned to them, citing an agreement made in 1991 that stated he would be returned to them with the death of Coco. Cincinnati also claims that their facilities would be better for Ndume. After all, they host several of his family members and have recently renovated their gorilla enclosures so that 3-year-olds can't jump into them. The zoo is backed by both the Association of Zoos and Aquariums and the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 2 organisations whose perspectives rarely align. And what about the Gorilla Foundation? Well, they claim Ndume would be unused to public display and, at the age of 37, is far too old to be transported successfully, and that the journey could kill him. Now, this brings to mind a notable captive gorilla death that occurred in 2016. I am of course talking about Bantu.
He's back again, if you can still remember him, because his time in the spotlight was kinda dim. At Mexico Zoo, the girls had tired of his tricks, so they planned to send him off to mix with some other chicks. They gave him some sedative to hit the sack, but unfortunately it gave him a heart attack.
Bantu was a 24-year-old silverback who lived in Chapultepec Zoo in Mexico City. Having failed to mate with the 3 females at the zoo, he was planned to be moved to the Guadalajara Zoo in west central Mexico. However, on administering sedative, Bantu went into cardiac arrest and died soon after. So that's it then. Transporting gorillas is dangerous and we should never do it, right? Well, not really. Most gorillas are sedated and transported without a hitch. Yes, there's a risk involved, and that does tend to increase with age, but many gorillas older than Ndume have been transported in the past, so it really shouldn't be a barrier to the final decision. But now let's look more critically at the Gorilla Foundation, and in particular, their famous gorilla Coco.
This Kong's got skills, so listen up dudes. She can use sign language to portray her mood. Or maybe not, no real science was done, and now this ape is dead, the opportunity's gone. She's fat, into cats, and a keeper abuser. She's the gorilla equivalent of a Reddit user.
M'lady.
Coco was born at the San Francisco Zoo in 1971, and unlike many captive-born gorillas before her, she was initially cared for by her mother. However, at the age of 1, she was struck down with an illness and moved to the zoo's hospital, where she met Francine Patterson. Patterson, who at the time was studying for her doctorate, started teaching the infant gorilla sign language. The 2 got on so well, the zoo loaned Coco to Patterson for 4 years, after which point Patterson set up the Gorilla Foundation as a means for caring for the gorilla on a more long-term basis. And here's where the story starts to get a bit more controversial. San Francisco Zoo was concerned that the treatment of Coco was unnatural. After all, while captive gorillas in zoos aren't exactly wild, Coco was being kept in a wire cage in a trailer. Coco was also much fatter than a normal female gorilla, suggesting she wasn't being fed properly. Perhaps then it is no surprise that when looking for a companion for Coco, the Gorilla Foundation turned to a different zoo. The hope was that Ndume and Coco would teach their offspring to do sign language too. Of course, it would be remiss of me not to bring up the fact that despite Francine having a doctorate herself, few scientific papers were ever published on the work with Coco, and many modern primatologists have shed doubt on the idea that Coco was actually capable of stringing together words, and rather just responding to positive reinforcement or emotional cues from her trainers. Also worthy of mention is the fact that Coco appears to have had a nipple fetish. Now, this on its own could implicate some sort of mistreatment as an infant, but what's perhaps more disturbing is that Patterson allegedly tried to force some of the Foundation's female employees to expose themselves to the gorilla. In a 2005 lawsuit, 3 women brought to light these accusations, as well as other notes about being forced to work unpaid overtime in unsafe and unsanitary conditions. Needless to say, the Gorilla Foundation sounds like a pretty dreadful place, and certainly not a good home for a gorilla. So, hopefully Ndume will be transferred away as soon as possible. But should he really be going to Cincinnati Zoo? After all, they sent him away in the first place to a rather disreputable organisation. And it's not like Cincinnati have the best track record with gorillas.
He has no style. He has no grace. After the Cincinnati zookeepers shot him in the face, he became a meme, which at first was nice, but now the people are bored of him, so he's kinda died twice. It wasn't his fault that the parents were thick, so to honor him, why don't you whip out your wallets?
Finally, the gorilla you've all been waiting for. Yes, Harambe. You know the story. It's the 28th of May, 2016. A 3-year-old boy climbs over the fence of the gorilla enclosure and falls into the moat. Harambe, a 17-year-old silverback, runs over to the child. Some of his actions appear caring as he behaves as he would with a young gorilla, but the screaming of park guests begins to agitate the ape, who starts to drag the boy around the enclosure. He carries the child up a ladder and sits with him between his legs. The decision is made by zoo officials to kill Harambe, and in one gunshot it's all over. Was the zoo right to kill Harambe? No. Often people try to apply a binary system to animal ethics, stating that if a human life is in danger, the animal's gotta go. But that's just stupid Ben Affleck Batman logic.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty. And we have to destroy him.
The chances that Harambe would actually kill the child were minimal. Gorillas have never killed any people, and sure, occasionally they kill juveniles of their own species, but Harambe appeared to be behaving in a way akin to how an adult plays with a young gorilla. The thing is, the zoo could have done literally anything else first. The shooting of Harambe strikes me as a cold, calculating act of capitalism. The zoo didn't want to deal with the bad press and possible lawsuits that an injured child might cause. They claimed that Harambe was part of the zoo family, but if they really cared about him, they wouldn't have shot him. Thankfully, the internet started holding them account for their nonsense. Well, for a while, until Harambe just became an ironic meme. Meanwhile, Cincinnati shut down their gorilla exhibits for renovations and started to distract everyone with their baby hippo. And that's basically it. No one really seems to be holding them accountable for their actions a mere 2.5 years ago. They killed a critically endangered animal on the off chance that he might hurt a 1 in 7 billion animal who put himself in harm's way in the first place, and everyone's just fine with that. I'm not someone who opposes zoos. Much of my childhood was made up of going to them, and I think they do a lot of important conservation work, which is why I think Cincinnati really betrayed our trust. I think it's time to look at one last dead gorilla.
Finally, he's here for you. It's the last member of the Dead Gorilla crew. He had a great life, that's for certain. For a start, unlike the others, he didn't die a virgin. When a kid fell in his pen, he made sure they weren't battered. Didn't get shot because the zoo thinks conservation matters. His acts of kindness met a positive reception. For his species, he greatly changed the public's perception.
Jambo was born in Basel Zoo in 1961 and moved to Jersey Zoo in 1972. Jersey Zoo was set up by Gerald Durrell in an attempt to create the first conservation-oriented zoo. Durrell was annoyed that basically every other zoo at the time was focused on large animals that weren't always that endangered, and that small animals were often getting sidelined. Of course, gorillas aren't exactly small, but they're certainly a concern for conservation, and Durrell was keen to ensure that his zoo opened in 1959 with a gorilla in tow. Fast forward to 1986 and the zoo now had many gorillas, including Jambo, Npongo, the female gorilla Durrell had initially obtained for the park, Nandi, another female, and the various offspring of the three. It's August 31st and a 5-year-old falls into the enclosure. Jambo goes over to investigate and starts to stroke the boy's back. Now, granted, he isn't as rough with the child as Harambe, but still there's a chance someone might shoot him. But they don't. Jambo is scared away when the boy starts to cry, and keepers enter the enclosure and rescue him, and the news is flooded with stories about how the gorilla was acting protectively. Jambo did more than any other ape to completely rewrite the way the public perceives these animals. Well, at least between him, Dian Fossey and David Attenborough. So why did I go on a random tangent about a gorilla who died in 1992, way before most of these other events, and before even Harambe was born? Well, it's because Jambo serves as an example for how gorillas in captivity should be treated. Bantu's death was a tragic accident, but Harambe's was deliberate, and while Coco lived for quite a while, I wouldn't say she had a particularly great life. Zoos should be acting in the interests of the animals they keep, for the conservation of the species. Cincinnati Zoo is a business run by tycoons. Zoo tycoons. I'm sure I don't doubt for 1 second that most of the keepers who work there truly care about the welfare of the animals. The problem is that I'm not convinced that the guys on top do. Cincinnati Zoo is a much better place than the Gorilla Foundation, but that's not really saying much given that it's a trailer park operation run by a crazy woman. I hope Ndume does move back, and I wish him a safe journey, but let's not forget the mistakes of Cincinnati Zoo, and let's hold them accountable for what they've done until they've shown that they've changed and that, like Jersey Zoo, conservation is their priority. And I don't mean let's throw another kid in the gorilla enclosure and see what they do this time. Thank you for watching this second episode of Conservation Conundrums. I hope you enjoyed all the controversial opinions I have about various dead gorillas and their captive situations. I hope to make some more videos, so do the thing. What did you think of that episode, Jeff? He says he loved it.